All right, everyone, welcome back to the Midnight Magic Musings channel. I am still your humble host, the Lord Cephas. I am joined by my tag team colleague, friend of the show, brother by another mother. Broken Ansible is joining us back on the program this week. BA, how are you?
I'm doing fine. How about yourself?
I could not be better. And you know what? We've got a new series of movies to talk about, a new feature we're doing here on Midnight Magic Musings. We're going to relive our childhood a little bit. Now, some would say we are children still to this day, and we don't deny it, but we want to talk about some 80s movies that hold a very special place in our hearts. And BA picked the very first one that we're going to review because it was very near and very dear to his heart. That movie, as you can tell from my background and by the thumbnail, we are going to review Killer Klowns from Outer Space. BA, this movie holds a very special place in your heart. I'm going to ask you on a scale of 1 to 5 what the people want to know. How watchable is it today on a scale of 1 to 5 for enjoyment?
5. Come on, man.
That's a bold play. It's a bold call. All right. Well, you're going to have to give us reasoning for that because I have to tell the truth. I just watched this movie in the last couple of weeks for the very first time because BA kept telling me I should, and he's my friend and my brother. And I'm like, hey, if he says to do it, I will do it. So I'll have my thoughts in just a little bit. But BA, I'm going to hand it off to you. What is it about this movie to this day that you enjoy so much?
There is a magic about this movie, and I don't mean clownish magic.
I see what you did there. Okay.
So it has let's first start off. This is not a cinematic, masterpiece, right? This isn't,
No.
ever gonna win awards other than, you know, craziest acting, craziest set pieces. Um, how to maybe have different feels in the same movie that
Mhm.
where you have seriousness, horror, and slapstick all in the same thing, and it still finds cohesion.
Right.
There's a lot of things about this movie that it has going for it. One of my favorite things about it, though, is that it is just it is what it is. It doesn't it doesn't try to be anything else. It doesn't try to shoot for the moon. It doesn't try to, compete with, aliens or alien.
Mhm.
It's in that time period where people really wanted to dive into the medium. A lot of people wanted to break into Hollywood. A lot of people wanted to they grew up with VHS, right? Some of means probably had a little bit more access to home cameras. And this movie's made by three brothers who I can just imagine, wanted to break into Hollywood. Um, and they produced something that still has a little bit of that LucasArt magic. So, one of the things, a lot of people love about the old Star Wars is that there's a lot of real effects, and this movie has a
Mhm.
lot of real effects. That it has a lot of makeup and costumes, um, and it just has a lot of normal people in it, so it's relatable. Um,
I thought that was interesting when I went to watch the movie. I didn't realize till I watched it how good the makeup work actually was. Those, those were not, that's no CGI.
no,
Dude, those were costumes and prosthetics they created specifically for that movie.
yes,
It's incredible the level of detail that they did, regardless of whether you view it as a cinematic masterpiece or not. And again, I'm not a fan of clowns, but the clowns looked very, very good on screen, even for a movie that came out when Ronald Reagan was still the president in 1988. But that level of detail and that creativity that still holds up to this day. I will die on that hill.
and when it did have like in the thumbnail, one of the my favorite clowns is pictured. The level of detail in makeupry is just so good,
Mm.
and yet at the same time, their costumes look like dime store, right? So you had this
Yeah.
juxtaposition that was visually striking, and I think it endeared a lot of people to this movie. It is a cult classic. It's that's without a doubt, it is one of the greats. Everybody wanted to, have DVD licenses and Blu-ray licenses for this movie. You can go to you can go to GameStop right now and they have like all sorts of merchandise. I think there's a video game coming out soon.
Supposedly, yeah.
Yeah. So there's still to this day, it has brand presence. And one of the things about it is just it is just a feel good, crazy adventure that you can watch. Kind of like in an hour and a half or so.
Sure.
I mean, I have it on VHS and I have it on DVD and Blu-ray, so it is
So
a
what I heard you say is you need a friend. That's what I heard you say. You need a friend if you've invested to that level. But no, in all seriousness, it's very interesting. I pulled some statistics because I like statistics. Check this out. The movie was released on May 27th, 1988. Okay, so I was about 10 years old at the time, about the same age you are. The runtime was only 88 minutes.
Yep.
It wasn't even a full hour and a half. That's 88 minutes with the credits. So it wasn't a super long movie, but they shot this movie. Now remember, this is 1988 money for $1.8 million. Their box office haul, $43 million in 1988 money, not adjusted for inflation. That would be like making somewhere in the $85 million range today.
and it played in a time where there were drive-in movie theaters too.
That is correct. And if you look at the price of tickets, they were not that super expensive. Certainly not anything we deal with today. And so you imagine, well, how many tickets did they have to sell to make that kind of money?
Quite a bit, and I think it had some international play because the company that distributed it does a lot of international movies. So I'm sure it did okay in Europe. One of the things about the movie is it kind of. Did you ever watch the Blob remake in the 80's?
Not the remake, no.
This is around the Tremors, Blob
Okay.
remake era. There's a lot of companies trying to capitalize on Alien and Aliens right about this time. This company produced some. That they're trying to capture that slapstick sci-fi adventure, something that's going to be played on USA Up All Night type of deal.
Oh, absolutely. Which it was.
Yeah, or TBS, late night. So
Oh, yeah,
this
that's true.
is and so I've watched this probably 20 times as a kid just on TBS alone. Couple times on USA Up All Night. Those were good times actually. So yeah, this movie it definitely has a personality to it. I think that's what I like about it, and it doesn't have like this. Like the payoff of the crescendo is good enough, but it doesn't like take you to the peak and then drop you off. It just kind of gradually raises and then just gradually ends. But yet it has like some comedy punch in there.
It does. By
Which
the way, we were talking numbers just to give you a round idea. The average ticket price in the United States in 1988 was just under $4, about $3.99 was the average ticket price. Today, that would be somewhere in the range of about $9.50.
Yeah.
So how many people had to see this movie to earn $43 million? It's an amazing pop culture phenomenon to earn that kind of money. Let's be honest, it was a shoestring budget. I mean, these folks went out of their way to create a movie. It wasn't for everybody, but it fit perfectly in the 1980s, especially the late 1980s.
Yeah, and there's other movies that kind of helped it along. I think that Swamp Thing earlier in the 80s, you had a lot of buy-in from the class of Duke Nukem High or class of Nukem High. It's Duke Nukem.
I saw that one on USA Up All Night too.
The Toxic Avenger. All those movies kind of kept a Neon Maniacs. That's another one. A little bit more mature theme with the monsters, but there was a appetite for those type of movies. So I think Killer Klowns was more accessible because a lot of those movies like Neon Maniacs, they're just they did want to jump scare you or have it was like a horror thriller type of thing. And Killer Clowns was something that you could take your girlfriend to, back in
I'm
the day.
I'm glad you brought up the jump scare because, as you know, the way I was raised, very in a deeply religious home, we didn't watch scary things.
Yeah.
And so, as a grown man, as old as I am, I still have that about me. I don't enjoy that
Hmm.
in general because that's just not who I was raised to be. Now, if you like it, that's cool. I don't gravitate towards that. So I anticipate a lot of jump scares. I was pleasantly surprised that wasn't the goal of the movie.
Nope.
The goal of the movie was really to lampoon society,
Yes.
and it did a really good job. Now, you are able to read and understand things on a much deeper level than I do, but I was able to pick out a few things. Number one, it's the absurdity of society in which we live.
Yes.
Society is so absurd on its own that it could never accept a bunch of clowns coming down from outer space.
Yeah.
Why? Because we live in our own level of absurdity. We could never buy into that because we have our own levels of absurdity we bought into. Would you say that's a fair assessment of kind of what the movie was trying to make, or at least one of the points it was trying to make?
Um, I think if you took that away, then it that's a point that I was trying to make. I'm
Hmm.
not sure if that was a social commentary movie. I mean, it's certainly they could have thought that. I haven't. The interesting thing is I've never listened to an interview with
Mhm.
the creators.
Do you have
Um,
the extended edition that has the interviews and stuff on it? Do you have that particular Blu-ray?
I'm not sure. I'd have to go look. I haven't bought a Blu-ray in so long, or watched a Blu-ray in so long that I'd have to go back and look. Um, but I would say that there was a lot of that going on in that genre. So I'm certainly willing to give that it was definitely um, trying to make fun of everybody.
Sure.
I mean,
Well,
it
remember back in the day, you could make fun of everybody and it was okay. Now we don't,
yeah.
we can't do that, of course. But
I
back in the
would
day, we all had something to pick on, which, by the way, we still do. But
yeah, and I think that it probably follows the line more of the Critters type of like slapstick
mhm.
than a lot of other movies. Like fills that gap. Like if you were to have a double, what do they call the double header like weekend? If you wanted to watch two
Yeah,
movies back to back at a drive-in, you would double feature. That's what they were called.
right.
So if you were to do a double feature, one could easily watch Critters, the first one, which has a little bit more, not I wouldn't say jump scare, but it is a little bit more serious in
Mhm.
the vein of that 80s slapstick horror. But this would have been a good palate cleanser to round the night out with.
I see what you're
So
saying.
I think that there is a through line of all these movies, which is why they're all cult classics.
Well,
So
a point you brought up, and I want to address it while we can. You mentioned Critters.
yeah,
The same people who worked on this movie worked on all the Critters movies too.
did they?
They absolutely did. Yep, they worked on Critters 1 through 4.
Oh, okay.
So your through line makes a whole lot of sense in light of the fact that those were some of their next projects.
Oh wow, I didn't even know that.
Yep,
So I'm
were
a big
Critters movies.
Critters movie fan. I like the first two
Well, if
particularly.
everybody watching and listening likes this, maybe we'll do Critters and we'll
Oh,
break those down. Why not? Hey, I'm feeling frisky. Okay, I saw this movie, in my middle age. So hey, let's just continue to go on and see what happens.
I
What I
think
found
Critters is
interesting,
great.
that's to be determined. But what I found interesting is it was shot on a shoestring budget. There weren't a lot of name actors and actresses in it. Um, there was one individual who would eventually become at least somewhat famous, and that would be Christopher Titus, who was actually in the movie. That was his first appearance in any kind of film. He would go on to be a comedian with success, but other than that, there weren't a ton of big superstars. But I have to ask you something. How did we end up with a living balloon dog?
So that's one of the things about the clowns that is so endearing is because they were almost like fairies. They were
Yeah.
magical. they kind of took a modern America, like, Midwest, or yeah, I don't know if you call what you'd call Ohio, but it felt like an Ohio type of, like, if you were to live there, what would you be afraid of?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you would be going to fairs all the time, right?
Yep.
So if you're going to fairs, you're going to see a lot of clowns, you're going to see balloons, you're going to see, like, um, fun houses, mirrors. So they took all that and put it on its head. They gave it a kind of like a funny spin, because they put the clowns front and center, right?
They did.
um it wasn't like some of the other horror movies, where they kind of want it to be more like Michael Myers. And one could say Michael Myers is like the first clown movie, right? So
Right. Yeah.
some people, you put on a mask like that, and it's, it's crazy. But I digress on that. But I think that where the magic comes into play is that the things that you would see them perform, like them getting out of the car,
Yes.
the dogs, the shadow puppets. I mean, it's they wanted to make those things, which comes back to your point a little bit, like the absurdity of it. Like, they did want to tell you, like, hey, these things can be dangerous.
Yep.
Like,
Well, and if you think about it, this is what I think Stranger Things found a way to do, at least in their genre, of tapping into 80s, whether it's retro or vintage and nostalgia, whatever terminology you want to use. This was actually happening during that time, which is why it feels so familiar to those of us of that age, because this is what we grew up in and around. Even if we weren't necessarily in Ohio, we still lived in these towns where a lot of this kind of stuff, where it made sense that, realistically something could happen, right? We always have movies that go back in the day. We live through the day. And I thought it was a great choice of using clowns, because realistically, there wasn't this great clown fear that seems to pervade society today. I mean, look, we had Ronald McDonald doing all kinds of commercials. Heck, he had an animated series. We had the toys. It wasn't a fearful of clown things. That's a more recent, quote unquote, phenomenon. But they chose something people tend to like to terrorize a very small town. And they were very creative in how they did it. I've got to say, to work with the budget they had, for example, their popcorn gun as their weapon, right? Here's another random fact for you. That was the most expensive set piece on set. That popcorn gun cost $7,000 to make. It took about 6 weeks to build it. And that was their biggest creation. That was their most expensive outlay the entire movie.
wow.
Was a gun that would fire popcorn. Which,
Popcorn
by
that
the
was
way, was
actually a
extremely,
tracking.
which is perfect, by the way.
Yeah, and it was also a tracking device too.
It turns out it was, as it went back to what was it, Debbie's house, I believe it was.
Yeah.
By the way, they were pioneering special effects long before, well, not just from what Lucasfilm did in the 70s and 80s with Star Wars. They were piloting their own special effects. For example, do you remember the dog, the balloon animal we were talking about?
Yeah.
Basically, that was latex that they had to use, because those balloons would have popped on the pine needles. Wow. Where they were doing. Yeah, they had all this stuff like, you know what, we're going to make it work. And in the movie, you can't tell anything other than it comes off low budget. And I don't mean that negatively. I mean, they found a way to make it work in the world in which they lived. Now, here's the thing that I thought was interesting. So it was the Chiodo brothers who did this.
Right.
They were big time special effects folk. That's what they did for a living. But here's the interesting part. They didn't even do most of the special effects. Most of it were sort of farmed out to other artists. But the big key for these brothers, do you remember the Clownzilla sequence that happens at the end?
Yeah.
Okay, that was those brothers. That was their baby. That one they built and they did, but they got a lot of help with this to make it be able to be worked. For example, pretty much all the vehicles, they didn't have a budget if they got damaged to replace them or to repair them. That's why you didn't see a lot of vehicles getting messed up. There was nothing in the budget to offset if they damaged it. What was the one? The Jeep with the webs in it. Remember that scene in the movie?
Yeah.
It cost $3,000 apparently to clean that thing after that scene was over. So it's like, well, didn't have a lot of money for that, but they made it work. And to this day, it still holds up. Now, I said they didn't have a lot of actors or actresses that were super famous at the time. This is going to show how old I am. There's an old time comedian by the name of Soupy Sales. He actually is a character on one of the old Scooby-Doo movie mystery cartoons that they used to do. They wanted him, but they couldn't afford him because his thing was he'd get pies thrown in his face. So like, why not get the guy who has pies thrown in the face be the security guard that the pies end up doing in, right? In the movie, the sort of acidic pies. But they didn't want to pay his price for getting him in the movie. He'd have done it. But then they kind of were like, well, if we spend that money, are people of, let's say, Mike, you and I's age, are they going to recognize who he is? Maybe, maybe not. And so it just didn't come off. They were like, no, we don't want to spend the kind of money on that. I think that was the right call. It works just as it is. Having a bunch of unknowns. In fact, you could argue that makes the story even better because you can't really tell who lives, who dies, because they're all new. It really leaves it open to actually have to let the movie play out rather than in 5 minutes of the movie figuring the whole thing out and know what's going to happen, which a lot of our movies these days do.
Oh, yeah.
I want to ask you about the clown molds for the faces. So as it turns out, they only made 4 of them, 4 different kinds of molds, right? They had sort of a peanut shape. They had a triangle shape, a circle shape. And basically there's one of them that is really just a triangle flipped upside down. And from those 4 molds, those 4 different types, that's how they built the clown faces. All the ones that you saw on the screen.
That's crazy.
Well, it's the ability to see and to be able to do. Now we would just do it with CGI and spend hundreds and hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars. They didn't have that, and they found a way. And by the way, it still holds up. What are the complaints we hear now of a lot of movies? Oh, that CGI was terrible. Or the animation. For example, the most recent Disney film, Wish. People complained about the animation. I haven't seen it yet, so to each their own. That doesn't get spoke about here because the detail is so good.
It is. And, one of the to juxtaposition the special effects of then and now, when I saw the Captain Marvel in the movie theater, I didn't hate it as much as everybody else did. I didn't like it either, but one of the striking moments in the movie is near the end, and it's where she's kind of outside the bubble, the energy bubble, trying to break in. The CGI is so terrible. It looks so low budget. I was shocked. Disney likes to pull people out of the movie these days with their politics or with their absurdities, where they just don't want to give you escapism. Right. But they're also breaking you out of the movies with low budget CGI because they feel like they don't need to. They're resting on their laurels, where these guys back in the 80s were hustling, bustling, making their stuff that stands to this day as quality effects. Like, and the pies are real, people.
Yeah, exactly.
Real,
Well, and that's the thing. They had a purpose and a goal, and there was no cleaning it up after the fact, so to speak. A lot of the stuff they had to get it in 1 or 2 shots at best.
Yeah.
That's all they had on their schedule. So a heck of a job by them to even pull that off. By the way, they pulled an Indiana Jones and the Crystal Skull long before there was an Indiana Jones and the Crystal Skull. There's one scene in the show where there's an ice cream truck that gets destroyed.
Yep.
It blows up. And you think the 2 brothers in that have deceased. As it turns out, they don't die.
No,
now, these are not spoilers because the movie's from 1988. If you ain't seen it by now,
it's like me. They have plot armor for real, but they're also like the glue to the entire movie.
They are, but what I'm saying is they hid in the freezer to survive the explosion. I saw that and I'm like, oh, freezer, refrigerator. Sure. It all works when there's an explosion. So I kind of smirked at that one only because of
it dropped out the sky too, didn't it?
It did. Yes, it did fall out of the sky and crash. But I thought that was a neat little way because, a lot of times people would escape situations. They would never explain why. at least they put in the effort to explain why they were able to escape. I mean, even something like that is a small thing, but I appreciated it because
And they left a cliffhanger too with the pies falling in.
oh,
Like, were they acid pies too? Who knows?
I asked you that when I watched the movie. Was it or wasn't it? You said probably not, but it could have been. We never know because they are not very nice to meet you clowns from outer space. They are killer clowns from outer space, by the way.
But they were clowns.
They are. The original idea for this movie was just to have the movie Killer Klowns. However, those brothers thought, you know what, in the 80s, because you mentioned Jason, we had Freddy. Who else am I missing?
Michael Myers.
Michael Myers, you mentioned him as well. Yeah, you have all these slasher type films, which is kind of what some people would have thought this was. And so they added on from outer space.
Yeah.
Instead of just leaving it Killer Klowns, because they thought it would get lost in the sort of the view of those types of movies. And as it turns out, it was brilliant for marketing. They don't get the credit they deserve because they distinguish themselves in a crowded market. Because let's be honest, horror has its own built-in genre that people will come out for it. But this took a little more effort. And so by putting from outer space, you really did separate yourself from everybody else. And that level of absurdity, you know, there's a certain part of me that's like, if the more absurd it is, the more I'm likely to check it out and probably enjoy it. And that's one good thing about B movies in the 80s. There's a lot of absurdity that we are going to cover here on the channel. I actually felt like watching this. This is pretty good. It's not the greatest thing I've ever seen, but I can appreciate the effort and what they were able to accomplish with what they had. And I don't mean that as a backhanded comment either. I mean, I'm really impressed they were able to get as much as they were.
So just remember, I saw this as a kid. All right.
You're a better man than I.
I saw this as, and I was like 10 or 11, right?
Okay.
I have watched it with friends over the course of 30 years. I have, college friends that I've never seen again. Friends that have moved far away, like from different backgrounds. People refer to it as Killer Klowns. People refer, they shortcut it because that's just the clique they grew up in.
Right.
They always shortcutted things, or they called it the full name, Killer Klowns from Outer. Let's watch Killer Klowns from Outer Space. It has been kind of one of those movies like Star Wars for me. There's another one, the one with David Bowie, Labyrinth.
Labyrinth, yeah,
is another movie in that same vein where it's these movies were magical. And even the Garbage Pail Kids movie.
That is a deep cut right there.
Yeah. We're talking about movies that we're trying to capture, and what I think is not just the Critters movie, because obviously these guys would go on to work on Critters, like you said, for special effects. But remember Gremlins. Yes. These were the type of movies that the big box office were pushing out. Yep. That struck, the iron struck while it was hot, and they got their second one out, and everybody started to try to make their version of their Saturday morning cartoon come to life, right?
Exactly.
And some people are just a little bit more perverse, or they're a little bit more on edge. They're a little bit more, into the horror. Mm-hmm. And so everybody started making their spins. You'd get the Neon Maniacs, you'd get the Critters, you'll get the Creature, which is another movie made by this company. You'd get the Italian horrors like Demons and Demons 2. Demons 2, that's some serious business, like for a kid to watch, I'll tell you. So, I mean, the Italian horror in general is very Japanese-like in terms of the way they approach the horror element. There's like a no forgiveness type of deal. Right. These things are just straight up evil, and there's no happy endings. But not in America. You have the slapstick, there is resolution to the conflict. And I thought this one was one of those movies where it stands above because it resolves the conflict. Mm-hmm. It doesn't really explain why the clowns leave.
No, I was left wondering. I don't know.
Like, they didn't have to leave, and it was almost like they're almost playing a predator. Like, this is just, we came down here, we got our food, and we're getting out of Dodge before the FBI shows up, right?
Mhm.
So it's kind of like there's a lot to think about, like, how absurd is this? But if we were to sit down and break it apart in a serious manner, it's like, oh, okay, well, this kind of works, right? It's kind of a social commentary. You can get really deep with it, even if the directors are never intended for it. And I'm not saying they didn't,
Sure.
but I just don't know. So, but you could reason your way into anything.
Well, sometimes some things are just meant to be surface level.
Yeah.
Some things are meant to be surface level and a layer beneath that. It could go either way. By the way, you were talking about kind of wrapping the plot line up here just a second ago. The officer, the deputy.
Yeah, the ex-boyfriend.
Yeah,
Dave
Dave, right?
Hansen.
Is it
Dave
Dave?
Dave Hansen or something like
Yeah,
that.
I think it is. Originally, when they shot the film, he died in the explosion of the clown ship.
Hmm.
When they showed it to test audiences, did like the test screenings, which we still do to this day, people hated it. They didn't like that ending. They
Yeah.
felt it was too dark, so they changed that so it'd be a more upbeat ending, and then with the pies.
Yep.
So it's kind of as like, we hear you. We want to send you home happy, but we're also going to mess with you a little bit too in giving you what you think you want, which I think is perversely brilliant. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean, that's twisted, but it's twisted in a good way.
Well,
So
he was a now he's Scarecrow, remember? You remember Scarecrow, Mrs. King?
I do.
Yeah, that's I believe that's Scarecrow, right?
Let me see here. So the actor who portrayed him was John Allen Nelson.
Oh, I'm sorry. He's in Scarecrow, Mrs. King.
Now, he was on some soap operas.
Yeah.
Can't help you with that one. He was in 24. So in the last 25 years, we've seen him in something. He was on Baywatch, those who watch that. So he did do some things.
Yeah, it was in Santa Barbara, which in Loving. I think that's where I saw.
Okay.
I think my mom watched Loving.
Got you. And by the way, just for random fact, he was also in Sheena, Queen of the Jungle, which was a syndicated series in the 90s. Look it up if you want to. I'm just saying it was out there. He was in Friends. He did a lot of different things.
Yeah, and he's been in like some recent movies that I wouldn't recommend anybody that likes their food in their stomach, the Feast movies, but he was in Feast 3.
Okay, got it. I didn't realize that he done a lot on television as well. By the way, even being in the remake of Knight Rider, which didn't really go very well there in the late 2000s, but he did do a run on it, so that was
he was in Quantum Leap as well.
I believe that's correct. I know he did a thing of Burn Notice because I ended up watching Burn Notice. I kind of like that show there on USA in the mid 2000s.
Yeah, my mom liked that show, and I haven't gotten into it, but I definitely am gonna go back to it. Wasn't he in the Hunk movie?
He was
Yeah.
Wow, that is an excellent cut. Yeah, that was pretty low budget too, because wasn't that the one where he's like a really nerdy dude?
Yes.
And it kind of turned him into this like really tan.
Yes, and the reason why I remember that movie is that used to be on USA as well. Not to mention I'm looking at IMDb, so then transparency. But
look at you. See, if you steal from one, it's research. If you steal from many, no, if you steal from one, it's plagiarism. If you steal from many, it's research. Carry on.
Yes, but I remember I knew he was in a very distinct show that I watched, and it was Hunk. Because I've watched Hunk probably 3 or 4 times. It was just on USA Up All Night all the time.
Gotcha.
So you had, if you sat around for it, you go through the motions, you're going to probably watch it. I think Caddyshack 2 is like that too.
So for USA Up All Night, were you a Rhonda Shear guy?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I like Gilbert Gottfried too. I think they were both great.
You know what? It's just the time you grew up in to appreciate it. it wouldn't work today because of all the streaming options you have. Back then, we didn't have streaming options.
Well, it does work today with Bill. What is it, Billy Bob? What's that?
Joe Bob Briggs.
Joe Bob. Yeah, yeah. So he's brought it back, and he was great back then. But he's brought it back, and he's done several really good. I think he did Chopping Mall. I watched his Chopping Mall one on what was it? Was that it's that channel on Amazon? I think.
Is it? It's not Shutter, is it?
Shutter. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, they have
Shudder.
that on AMC Plus too. That's one of the channels under that umbrella. By the
Yeah.
way, he did several episodes of The Walking Dead too.
Hmm.
It's on AMC. I've never watched it, but I saw that it was on there the other day, and we were getting ready to do the series finale of Fear the Walking Dead. He did a couple episodes of that, so that
Oh,
might be
cool.
worth something just watching one day to kick back and kind of see what's going on.
Yep.
So, kind of bringing Killer Klowns from Outer Space to a close. This is one of those hidden gems that I slept on because of my upbringing. I'm not ashamed to admit that, but I'm definitely glad you talked me into watching it. And I did even watch it late at night. So if I was going to get scared, at least, it'd keep me awake. So that didn't happen. I actually fell asleep first time watching it, but that's not unusual. Broken Ansible will tell you I fall asleep during everything. I'll fall asleep sitting up talking. It doesn't matter.
While you're sleeping.
Yeah, narcoleptic. I'm done.
Yeah.
But it was really, really enjoyable. I'm glad I got to watch it. And again, it takes me back to that time when I was, that would have been when I was 9-10 years old.
Yeah.
What an imagination to have, to be able to enjoy that. Now kids would look at it and go, well, the soundtrack's not very good or all that.
I think the soundtrack is great.
You know what? It has done very well on vinyl and several other types of releases. So yeah, apparently people agree with you.
It was a time where punk was being discovered by the mainstream.
Mm-hmm.
So you had a lot of influence in punk, but it's kind of distinctly Californian, and Californian punk is a lot different from like the real punk back in the day. The real punk, you would go to shows, you would go to Tampa, Florida. That's where the big punk scene was. Now there was I think in Sacramento and whatever, I think they had a big punk thing kind of going there. But and then you had the UK, right? So this had this Hollywoodized, punk rock 80s glam kind of mishmash type of deal. Like it felt zany, I think is the word I want to use. It felt zany. Like it's catchy. It's absurd. Like it can get stuck in your head, and for no good reason either. And I think that the movie is like that in general. And I think that's one of the things I appreciate about it is that it is so distinct in my memory with, if you talk about movies of the 80s. Now, there's a lot of movies from the 80s I've watched. I am the catalog. I've burned them in to memory because I've probably watched each and every one of them at least 20 times. So,
well, then some of these you're going to remember because we were talking about the musical composition of this movie. It's done by John Massari. By the way, people might say, oh, well, he was just in a B movie. Nah, dude studied music at UCLA. Yeah. Dude was legit. So some of the 80s and early 90s movies he worked on. Perhaps you'll remember. Now, I would recognize these. You may. Lorenzo Lamas. Remember him?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
He did a series of movie called Snake Eater.
Yep, I remember.
Snake Eater 2, Snake Eater 3. He did it for that. There was one of the movies of Kickboxer post Jean-Claude Van Damme. He did some of those. He did a lot of B movies in the late 80s and early 90s. But he also did some things that were pretty mainstream, like what's the show on the History Channel, the one that's been so popular, American Pickers.
Yeah, I love that show.
He did some of the music for that. He did some of the Wonderful World of Disney themes over the years. I mean, the dude's legit. And so whether they knew it or not at the time, they were very fortunate to get the type of individuals they had working with the project, because these were legitimate individuals who would go on to have really great careers. So I thought that was pretty cool. There is supposed to be a video game. And in fact, just for the record, that this gentleman is supposed to have come back to do the music for the video game.
Wow.
So, and that is supposed to, and I emphasize supposed to, because you never know in the video game industry, BA is far more plugged into that than I am. But allegedly, it's supposed to come out in 2024. Will it? Don't know, but that is alleged anyway. So we'll just have to see if there's a game. Now, we were talking a little bit earlier before we came on the air. Couldn't you see it as a Nintendo game in the late 80s where you
Oh,
had
absolutely.
duck pies that were being thrown out at you? It would have made perfect sense back in the day.
Maybe like a Sega Genesis game, to be honest with you. I think that's time period correct, or at least
Correct.
the Sega Master game, because
Yeah.
they were a little bit more mature than the Nintendo stuff. Even though the NES is dodgy, it's actually got some horror games in Japan that we never got that are
Right.
actually like actual horror games. Um, but in America, it was they kept it Disney for the most part, at least. Even the Friday the 13th movie, and it's not that scary. Um, but I think Sega Genesis would have been it, and I think the palette, this, because the thing about the Nintendo is that it has just no color palette that could really do this show justice. The Sega Genesis, however, um, could do it justice, I think. And I would actually like the video game to be a retro remake, like in the pixel art style. There's some amazing pixel artists these days. Um, One of the things that I kind of am fascinated by is a lot of the kids coming out of colleges, the ones that are in eyeballs deep into debt. A lot of the artists that can't get jobs anywhere, they're going to Twitter and making it like retro pixel art,
Mm-hmm.
selling t-shirts, they're hustling. And some of the stuff that they're doing, they have the eye, but they have the tools of 2023. But
Right.
they have that eye where they could totally take, something like Killer Klowns and make an absolutely like fantastic video game out of it.
Well, there is an official trailer for the game, and if people are interested and this proves popular, we'll just sit down and play the trailer and watch it and talk about it, about the video game trailer. That's something we can do going forward. Allegedly, you're supposed to be able to play as the clowns
Huh.
in the game, so that will be a little interesting to see if that comes to fruition and if we're able to do it. Trust me, we'll find it, we'll play it. It may be great, it may be terrible, but we'll find it because, well, you have to now that I've been exposed to this. Couple last things here, and then I will stop monopolizing the discussion. Um, the soundtrack is very good. Obviously, we talked about that. Um, the other thing that I find probably the most interesting is there's a scene in the movie where there are shadow clowns, specifically shadow dinosaurs, I guess,
Yeah.
where they swallow a bunch of people.
Oh, that's great.
I thought it was so absurd. I liked it.
Yep.
I appreciated the level of absurdity. Remember, I'm a guy who likes the movie Airplane, and I make no shame. I am not ashamed of that. I'll go to my
I
grave
liked
telling you how
Airplane.
great that movie was.
I liked it.
But it's
Even the
absurd.
sequel.
It's I did too. It's completely absurd, but I appreciate it for what it is. And when I saw that, I'm like, huh. Not only are we doing that, but we're shooting people with ray guns. It actually turned people into cocoons.
So just remember, just because that this movie is absurd, um, it's very Lovecraftian.
Mhm.
A lot of people don't realize how sinister it is. And that is one of the cool things that makes the sinister and the ambivalent and the um so in the HP Lovecraftian universe, you have a lot of like outer gods, lesser gods type of deal. Like they're just creatures that would make your brain fry. There's a lot of movies in the 80's that were made, like Reanimator, stuff like that. There's a
Mhm.
lot of movies about the HP Lovecraft stuff. This is, in my opinion, one of those movies that people sleep on, where they are literally messing with quantum mechanics, and they're doing it in the most insane, whimsical, absurd way. They are clowns, but are they? like they look like clowns to us, but these are sinister individuals. They just see us as food, and they have. Is this camouflage? Is this really what they are, or did or God let take any sort of like
Mhm.
seriousness? That
You know,
is very HP Lovecraftian.
that's never explained.
No,
We don't really know. It's just kind of left to your imagination.
yeah,
Whether they're really clowns or is that just their form that they take? Is there something underneath? We don't know.
and also remember, it was pretty big,
Yes, it was.
so that they were bringing like Pennywise to life almost in some ways. So, and Pennywise is a very Lovecraftian. That is Stephen King's like love letter to Lovecraft. I think that a lot of people sleep on the sinisterness of Killer Clowns.
Well, one
But,
last thing in the
well, the
last
shadow
couple of years,
puppets are straight up like
it was
quantum mechanics, man.
it just basically was like, that fits in. That actually makes sense. Um, One of the interesting things about the clown genre is they've now created an entire franchise. I forget the name of the movie, but it's about this evil clown Saul, evil murderous clown that they've done. I think 3 movies of now.
I think I've
Um,
seen it in the DVD at
yeah,
Redbox.
it's on one of the streaming services. It might be on Tubi or one of those, but um, it's still a genre. But really, before this, there was no genre. There weren't a ton of evil clowns, other than there is a Scooby Doo episode from the '70s where there's an evil clown running around chasing Scooby and the gang. But really, other than that, it wasn't really an explored genre. So good on them for kind of getting in on the front end of
Yeah,
what's become a trend.
yeah, there's there yeah, there's several movies now. I'm looking, yeah, there's a bunch of clown movies now.
But if you look in the '80s, it wasn't as prevalent, so they stuck out in the marketplace.
Yeah.
That was getting pretty busy with, you mentioned Tremors, which we'd have in the '80s and '90s, and even 2000s, Critters, Gremlins, ton of different offshoots of those. But this one just kind of holds its own place.
Yep. It
And
stands by itself.
it does. It has its own lore, and it's just kind of there. It never had any sequels, so it just stands as it is. We can sit here and debate what it is about and what it's not about. And you know what? That's the awesome part of being fans.
Yeah.
Well, BA, as we're wrapping up here, anything else you want to share? Any other thoughts you have on Killer Clowns, from outer space before we wrap this up, bring it to a close?
Yeah, I would just if people are looking for a brain dead, movie, this can be that movie for you. If you want an intellectual, like, how did they do that type of thing, this movie is also for you. And if you just want to see something that is from a time that does not exist anymore, this movie could just be that for you. So
Let me ask you this. Did you ever think that popcorn would serve as a homing device?
well, so now that I think about it, they were kind of going door to door because there is that scene where they're walking through the street. So
Yes.
was it a homing device? I kind of think it was implied that it was because
Oh,
they
yeah.
showed you the thing getting on there. But
Right.
at the end of the day, was it a homing device or was it just murderous? I don't know.
I don't know how that breaks down. It was never really delineated
I
one way or the other.
I think I might be walking the homing device back now that I think about it. You have gotten me shook.
Hey, that's what best friends do. We shake one another, and at the end of the day, we just shake together and be like, it'll be fine. It'll be good tomorrow. It's okay.
Just wait until we get done with the 80's and we move on to the 90's because
Well, it'll be 15 years before we get done with the '80s because there are so many B movies to go through. We haven't even gotten into my favorite genre, and that is the canon films, the American Ninjas,
oh yeah,
the
I
Golden
was
Globus films with like Chuck Norris missing in action.
oh yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I was a big Missing in Action fan.
Oh my goodness! But those are the kind of B
Iron
movies.
Eagle,
Iron Eagle 1, 2, 3. How about No Retreat, No Surrender?
No Retreat, No Surrender. It's one of my favorites.
Listen, that's the kind of stuff you got in the 80s. I'm just going to say we've got a lot of material to work from, so we look forward to bringing it to you. But
Yeah, does actually Tremors does count because it's 1990, and technically that's the 10th, right?
yeah,
So 79 or 80 is actually still the 70s, and 1990 is still technically the 80s, I think.
we can
Uh,
count it however we want because it's our show. If
yeah.
we want to say 91, we'll say it that way. Why? Because inflation. We'll make it however we want it to be. It's fine.
Yeah,
It's
because
fine.
I think Tremors is like the pinnacle of the 80s
Now,
movies.
remind me real quick before we go. Tremors 1, Reba McEntire.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's what I'm talking
That's
about.
Reba.
Uh,
Yeah, I like Reba McEntire.
by the way, that one scared me as a kid too, because pretty much anything scared me as a kid. So we're going to get
It
to talk about
it
that.
scared me, but it wasn't that scary. Like
Well,
it had a couple of jump scares
you're
for sure.
you're you're a lot like Optimus Prime. You are built of tougher metal than I am, as he told Megatron as they were fighting to the death.
Well,
Um,
that's kind of why the 80s movies may be a short brief stint, because a lot of the movies um either had the you know unsavory bits revealed, or they had horror elements to them. So there's a lot of movies I'm sure you missed.
you know what? The one I would like to talk with you about, if we get the chance to do it, that would be Masters of the Universe.
I just watched that again the other day.
Well, I need to watch it again because there's a lot of behind the scenes stuff that was going on. I would love to talk about it with you. But between now
Yeah,
and next week, we'll come up with another B movie
yeah.
from the 80s to
That
talk about, or a
it,
series.
it so it I'll just give you a little sneak peek on that one.
Yeah.
One of the things I like about that movie, not to mention that, Courtney Cox and the guy from uh, Star Trek Voyager,
Yeah. Tom Paris was in it.
Tom
Yeah.
Paris, yeah. Uh, Not to mention that I think the cast is really great, but I think it actually culminates a lot of um, vision of the 80s. If you look at a movie, say like Back to the Future, and you look at it like a big panorama, don't think about it as a movie per se. Think of it as a panorama looking at American culture in this time period. I think a lot of movies don't capture that panorama the same way that the Goonies is another example. They showed you like a panorama of America, License to Drive, stuff like that. These cult classic, really well done movies that people hold in high regard. But movies like Masters of the Universe also, and Critters, have that same panorama view of the America at that time. They're almost one to one. It is so, the vision, the camera work, the capturing of day to day people
Hmm.
in those moments, like they may be at the barbecue restaurant at, like at the beginning of Masters of the Universe, where the little dude steals the chicken out of the back of or the ribs out of the back of the Cadillac or whatever.
What is that? Grill door or something like that?
Yeah, grill
Yeah.
door.
Yeah.
So they just show a lot of this time, downtown, America,
Mhm.
which I think that you'll find that it's very hard today to get that. Everybody wants to, they want the destruction set pieces of downtown New York. Who cares? Downtown New York looks like that every day. Like
I was
we
just
we
going to
don't
say that's not a new occurrence. Yeah.
yeah, that I mean, New York is messy all the time. Like I don't care about it, having this, a boat being slammed into a building, by a super robot. I don't really care about that. But what's interesting to me is a movie like Interstellar, which shows you downtown America in this almost like post-apocalyptic world. What does that look like? And I
Right.
think those moments in movie, in movies now, kind of pluck a chord with me on how movies were back in the day when you saw like the, you know, um, invasion or invaders from Mars and Spaced Invaders and all these other, really, interesting films that did not get a lot of box office, play, but they found a home on TBS and USA. So I think that we actually got to see a picture of America, or even just the Americas, right?
Right.
Because I'm sure Canada looked a lot like this too in the 80s, especially uh, Vancouver, because a lot of these movies were probably shot in Vancouver. I just think that there's a lot going for these movies.
And I look forward to breaking more of these down with you. Hopefully, we can make this a recurring segment and just kind of see, hey, let's relive some of the B movies from the 80s. We'll work our way through those, and then we'll see what the 90s bring for us. Well, on behalf of BA Broken Ansible, we'd like to thank everybody for watching. We'd like to thank everybody for leaving a comment before you head out the door. Click the like button if you've not done so. If you've never subscribed, go ahead and click that notification bell. Turn that notification bell gray. Click all, because we have tons of content that we do on here. We have dad jokes every day. They're terrible, and we revel in that. We cover sports. We cover wrestling as pop culture. We cover other types of pop culture things. And yes, we do a little nostalgia because we're older, and that's what we do. So feel free to come back and check us out during the week, and then share this thing out on your social media platform of choice. Send it to the people you like. Send it to the people you don't like. It's okay. We don't take it offensively anyway. We just appreciate the interaction and the feedback that we get from you, our loyal viewers and our listeners. So behalf on Broken Ansible, behalf of BA, I am your humble host, Lord Cephas. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Thank you for participating. We'll see you again next time on Midnight Magic Musings.